Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I don't think that we should only read women in March. So here are 10 books that is an inspiration for you to pick up for the rest of the year as well. In no particular order, from Nigeria, this is Balaraba Iyamat Yakubu. Sin is a puppy that follows you home. This is a part of Hausa culture. She is an Hausa author. And this is the story about a woman who is getting divorced from her husband at the same time as her daughter is getting married to a very successful man. And what I really enjoyed about this is, of course, the cultural context of it. There are so few books from the Hausa culture specifically. It's a Muslim culture, which sort of is very different from what we talk about and what I read in Norway, sadly. And it's also quite interesting to then see how the Muslim context influences everything. Also when it comes to how the book ends. Because it ends with someone having to not necessarily apologize, but having to still try and make up for what they've done wrong. Because the focus isn't necessarily on forgiveness as a value, but punishment as a value, as a way of making things right again, which is such an interesting take on it. In addition to it's such a sweet romance book with a daughter and her new husband that are just, no, they're very cute. For Finland, I would recommend Tove Jansson's Who Will Comfort Toffel. Now, I love this edition because it has such wonderful illustrations done by Tove Jansson. And they are, at least in this one, they're actually colorized. Very often I usually just see it in black and white. But this book is about poor Toffel, who is a bit lost, isn't really connecting with people around him, and sort of says, oh, that's fine. I don't need friends. Who needs friends? But of course, when you then become sad, who will comfort you, Toffel? So I love Tove Jansson because she writes such brilliant children's literature that doesn't talk down to children, but rather invites them to join in with the conversation about what does it mean when we don't necessarily have friends. The Blind's Paradise by Dong Thu Hong. This book is about Vietnam in the 80s and 3 women who have to navigate the communist rule in Vietnam at this time. The country is also very much a patriarchy at this time, and so you have a lot of different levels of what does it mean to be a part of this. Is this something we enjoy? Is it something that we are critical to? Regarding both feminism, but also, of course, a reaction to the communistic system in Vietnam. And that book was also one of the first books that introduced the US readers to a book from a Vietnamese perspective. And it talks a lot about the Vietnamese culture. From Mozambique, and these are not in any particular order, by the way, but from Mozambique, Neighbours, The Story of a Murder by Lillian Mumpler. I have a video for this because I read it for my reader book from every country of the world. But shortly, this is about a time in Mozambique's history where they were experiencing a lot of terrorist attacks from South Africa. So South Africa is a neighbor they're referring to. And one of the things I so enjoyed about this book is the characterizations. It's the way that each character is developed and given their own backstory, which makes you understand why they are doing the things that they are doing, even if you don't agree with the things that they are doing. For Japan, I want to recommend Mieko Kawakami's Boobs and Eggs. And this is about a Japanese woman. My dog is thirsty. I can only apologize. Maybe she heard the term boobs and eggs and thought they were referring to something else. Sadly, she's allergic to eggs, so we can't give her any eggs. She just look at us with those big eyes, proper puppy dog eyes, even if she's not a puppy anymore. And like, why can't I have any eggs? Please? Can I please have some eggs? But she's allergic, so we don't want to give her any eggs. When we're referring to boobs and eggs, what we are talking about is a Japanese woman who is getting interested in having artificial insemination and a child out of wedlock, which is quite new development in Japan, both technologically and culturally. And so there are a lot of discussions of how ethically is it to bring a child into the world through artificial insemination, and talking a lot about the value of Japanese women, sort of what kind of culture do we want in Japan, but also an interesting view about children's rights. How should we understand children? Are children just empty vessels that we will fill ourselves into? Or do they sort of, when they come into this world, will they want different things than what we think they want? So, a very interesting take on motherhood in a generally conservative country. From South Korea, I would recommend The Vegetarian by Han Kang. Han Kang has won the Nobel Prize, and The Vegetarian is one of her most known. So I'm not surprised if a lot of you already have read it. For those of you who haven't, yes, it's worth the hype. It's a reason why it was her most known, even before she won the Nobel Prize. This is about a woman who has experienced quite a traumatic childhood and therefore is having a mental breakdown. And this story about her mental breakdown is told through the lens of her husband, the lens of her brother-in-law, and then the lens of her sister. And it talks a lot about how does a society like South Korean, which is quite conservative, quite keeping everything sort of under wrap, deal with something like mental illness. I have people have described this book as quite gruesome and quite sort of brutal. And the things that she is doing isn't necessarily that brutal, but Han Kang is using quite a frank language and a very direct language, which means that things that she's describing feels much more graphic than they actually are, because we're used to a lot of the things that she was talking about being hidden behind a lot of euphemisms. So it will feel sort of graphic and gruesome, even if the things that she's doing isn't necessarily graphic and gruesome. For Taiwan, I want to recommend Notes of a Crocodile by Ki Miawan. And this is a book set in the 1980s about a woman who is attracted to women, other women. So she is most likely a lesbian, as was Ki Miawan. And how does a woman deal with being a lesbian in a culture where that is quite taboo? We're not really supposed to. I mean, a woman's job is to get married and then have children. And if you don't want that, well, where do you kind of fit in? Where sort of can you navigate without being sort of a threat to the males who are threatened by lesbians? So Notes of a Crocodile. The crocodile is here, of course, the attraction to women. And I quite enjoyed it because she talks very frankly about it. There is something very relaxed about a lot of the scenes that she is describing, even if it's scenes that you sort of, but shouldn't you be worried here? Shouldn't you react more from this? And she's like, it happens. That's life. And you're like, okay, do you need to talk to someone? So yeah. For Honduras, I would recommend 13 Colors of the Honduran Resistance. I have a video of this for I read this for my Reading Around the World Challenge, but Melissa Cardoza was a journalist, and during the Honduran Resistance, she traveled around and talked to a lot of different people and wrote about how they sort of reacted to everything that was going on. And there are pictures, photographs. And what I really enjoyed about the book is that she has done a very good job with covering the variety of different groups. So she talks about with people with different skin colors. She's talking about with different ages, from the countryside, people who have a higher education. So you do get a feel for the complexity of everything around what was going on at this time. Because she sort of says that there are so many different voices for people, even if sort of the people she has interviewed, or she hasn't directly interviewed them, it's more that she has written about sort of like a journalistic portrait of them. But they're still sort of representing the same side of the conflict in a sense, but it sort of shows how complicated and complex even just one side of a conflict can be. For Botswana, I have read A Question of Power by Bessie Head. This is a book that deals again with mental illness and how cultures, especially regarding cultures where women are supposed to be strong and sort of put together, how does everyone around them deal when they are clearly not mentally well. And what I really enjoyed about this book is that this book puts mental illness into a family context. So it talks a lot about how does children deal when their parents are suffering from a mental illness. Because it can be confusing for a child when a mother or a father isn't mentally well. And everything sort of deals with them sort of being given good information and good way of handling this. And lastly, for Belize, I would recommend Benji by Kathy Esquel, also about mental illness. I didn't think and plan this that 3 of the 10 books are about mental illness. And some of the others are probably skirting around it, but that's the case. I don't know. I've recently read a lot of good books about mental illness. Do not comment on about that. But I have a separate video for this as well. I read this for Reading Around the World Challenge for Belize. And this is probably one of my new favorite books of all times. Benji is a man who has schizophrenia. We get his diagnosis about halfway through the book, but it's quite clear what kind of diagnosis he has. And the book starts with him being witness to a murder. And just that setup is so brilliant when you have the only witness to a murder is also someone who has visual and auditive hallucinations. Because it brings into the question, not necessarily is he trustworthy as a witness, because it's quite clear that he is seeing what he is seeing, but he doesn't understand what he is seeing. And everything around then, of course, with it, when he mentions something, he doesn't really go and tell, I've seen this. He just, oh, the poor, blah, blah, blah. And everyone around him is like, okay, that was new. Because that's what he does. And what I, again, enjoyed so much about Kathy Esquel's writing is the way she does the characters. She gives everyone a believable backstory where there are no bad people. It's only people who are doing bad decisions and bad acts. And she really puts a lot of the emphasis on how the society influences the way people are. So, for example, it is quite common to have children out of wedlock. It's quite common for men to sleep around and produce sort of children with that woman and that woman and that woman. And that, of course, does something with especially the young men who grow up in Belize, who doesn't really have a father figure that is involved in their life. And so she is quite clear that of course, this influences young men. Of course, this influences women who are married and are terrified of acting when their husband is unfaithful because, well, will he divorce us? What will be the consequences of that? What will be the consequences for the children? So it's such a wonderful set of character portraits in this book. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.